You start thinking you've seen it all: dust storms, movie sets, the rise and fall of men and empires. I've walked through fake gunfights and real heartbreaks. I've directed war stories and love stories, but none of them ever came close to the one I found myself in 3 months ago. That night wasn't special: no whiskey on the table, no scripture on the nightstand. Just me, an old man with tired eyes, trying to find a little peace before morning. Then came the dream. Or maybe it wasn't a dream at all. I found myself standing in a room that didn't belong to this world. No clouds, no fire, just light. It came from everywhere and nowhere, soft and alive. And then I saw him. You don't need introductions when you meet the real thing. I knew it was Jesus. Not the painting, not the Sunday school version, but real, as solid as the floor beneath my feet. He looked at me in a way no one ever has. Through me. Every role I'd ever played, every mask, every lie I told myself gone. Just me and the truth. For a long time, he said nothing. But in that silence, I felt everything I'd ignored all my life, the weight of grace I never really understood. When he finally spoke, his voice filled the air like thunder wrapped in kindness. "Clint," he said, "I want to show you something." And suddenly, we were standing in a courtroom that stretched beyond sight, a place where eternity was being decided. Thousands stood before a throne, their lives stripped bare. They had done good things, believed the right words, played the part of Christian better than most, but one by one, I watched them turned away. It hit me like a gunshot to the chest. I'd spent a lifetime pretending, performing, even believing, but not really knowing, not really surrendering. I realized how easy it is to fool the world, and how impossible it is to fool God. That night, I saw more truth than in all my years behind a camera. And I woke up different, not perfect, just aware. We spend our lives chasing legacy, applause, meaning. But the real story, the only story that matters, begins the moment you see yourself through his eyes. Everything else falls away. I don't know why he chose to show me that, but I know it wasn't for nothing. Maybe he wanted me to tell you, life's not about the roles you play or the trophies you collect. It's about what's left when the lights go out and you're standing in front of the only one who ever really saw you. And when that day comes, he won't care who you pretended to be. He'll only care if he knew you. Faith can fade so quietly you don't even notice it slipping away. It doesn't leave with a crash, it drifts like smoke from a dying fire. I used to think I believed. I said the right words, bowed my head at the right times, and told myself that made me a Christian. Growing up, my mother made sure we went to church, said grace before meals, bowed when the preacher prayed. Back then, faith was simple. It was something you did because your folks did it. But somewhere between Hollywood lights and late-night edits, I let it turn into background noise. I called myself a believer, but truth is, I was just coasting on habit. See, I thought being good was enough. I gave to charity, didn't cheat or steal, tried to treat people fair. I figured heaven was a reward for not being as bad as the next guy. But faith built on comparison is a shaky thing. It stands tall only until you see what real faith looks like. I used to joke that I'd done more good than harm, so I was probably on the right side of the line. But now I know there isn't a line. There's only truth. Either you know him or you don't. Looking back, I see how easy it is to play the role of a decent man and still miss the point. I'd spent years portraying heroes, lawmen, men who stood for justice. But when the camera stopped rolling, I was just another man trying to make sense of his own soul. I had the language of belief, but not the life of it. My faith was polite, comfortable, and safe, the kind that never asks you to change, only to blend in. I guess that's the danger of living long enough to think you've got it figured out. You can start mistaking motion for meaning, church attendance for transformation, good manners for righteousness, belief for relationship. I never denied God, but I never really let him in either. It's like owning a Bible you never open, or wearing a cross without ever carrying one. I thought I was fine until that dream, the one that shook me to my bones. Only then did I realize how far I drifted, how quiet my heart had become. Faith isn't a background belief. It's the pulse of a living soul. It's not something you wear for an hour on Sunday. It's who you are when the lights go out and nobody's watching. I used to think I had faith because I believed in Jesus. Now I know real faith isn't believing he existed. It's letting him change who you are. That's what I'd been missing all those years. Not religion, not routine, relationship. And once you've seen the difference, you can't unsee it. That night started like any other. No prayers whispered, no Bible by my bed, just an old man, worn out from a long day, hoping for a few hours of sleep before the sun came up again. But when I closed my eyes, something shifted. Suddenly, I was standing in a place that didn't belong to this world. It wasn't heaven the way painters imagined it, no clouds, no golden gates, no angels with trumpets. It was simpler, quieter. A soft light filled the room, but I couldn't tell where it came from. It wasn't blinding, just alive. Every breath felt like it carried meaning. Every second carried weight. And then I saw him, 10 feet away, standing still, watching me. I didn't need an introduction. When you meet truth face to face, you don't have to ask for a name. I knew it was Jesus. Not the storybook version, not the gentle figure from stained glass. He looked real, solid, strong. His eyes held something I can't quite describe, kindness and judgment, love and fire, all at once. The kind of gaze that doesn't just look at you, it looks through you. For a moment I tried to speak, tried to find words, excuses, something to fill the silence. But when you stand before someone who knows every secret you've ever buried, every mask you've ever worn, words don't come easy. It felt like every character I'd ever played, every public image, every story I told about myself just dissolved into dust. All that was left was me, the raw, unfiltered soul underneath all the noise. No lights, no camera, no applause. Just truth. I realized in that moment how much of life is performance. We wear titles, reputations, and good deeds like armor, hoping they'll make us enough. But there, standing before him, none of it mattered. He wasn't interested in the actor or the legend or the man the world thought I was. He was looking at the heart, at the quiet corners I didn't want anyone to see. He didn't speak right away, and yet his silence said everything. It was like he was showing me that all the pretending, all the self-assurance, all the good enough faith I'd carried for decades meant nothing if it wasn't real. I'd spent a lifetime playing heroes, but now I was face to face with the only one who ever truly was. When he finally spoke, it wasn't loud, but it filled everything. His voice carried both power and peace, and in that instant I knew whatever was coming next wasn't just another dream. It was a reckoning, a meeting not with judgment but with truth itself. And once you meet truth, you can't ever go back to pretending. The next moment the light around me shifted, and I found myself standing in a place that stole the breath right out of my lungs. It wasn't earth, but it wasn't a dream either. It was vast, bigger than anything the human eye could take in. The ground beneath me shimmered like glass, and above stretched a ceiling so high it disappeared into eternity. In the center stood a throne, majestic, terrible, and beautiful all at once. Every fiber in my being knew what this place was. Judgment. Not the kind we see in movies, but the real thing, the final one. Jesus stood beside me, calm and unshaken. Before the throne, a line stretched so far it vanished into the horizon, men and women of every age, every nation, every story. They weren't pagans or unbelievers. These were church folks, people who sang hymns, carried Bibles, served, preached, gave, believed. They came forward one by one, confident, certain they'd made it. I could hear their words, though no one was really speaking aloud. Lord, I accepted you when I was 12. I went to church. I tithed. I led worship. I served. I believed. It sounded right. It sounded good. But then came the voice from the throne, deep as thunder, final as death. I never knew you. Depart from me. The words sliced through the air like a sword. You could feel the weight of eternity in every syllable. The faces of those people, hope turned to horror, certainty to disbelief. Some cried, some protested, some begged. But it was too late. I watched as they were led away, and their cries faded into the distance. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. Every scene carved itself into my memory. I turned to Jesus, shaken. But they believed in you, I said. They did good things. They served. His eyes were filled with something beyond sadness, something holy. He didn't answer right away. He just looked at the next person in line, and I realized this wasn't just about them. It was about all of us, about me. That courtroom wasn't built to condemn, it was built to reveal. All the masks, all the self-deception, all the ways we convince ourselves we're fine because we checked the right boxes, they don't hold up there. You can't hide behind religion when you're standing before reality. As I stood there watching, I felt the weight of a truth I'd never understood before. Heaven isn't for those who performed well, it's for those who were known. Not known by the world, but known by Him. And in that place of infinite light, I realized something terrifying and freeing at the same time. You can't fake a relationship with God. Not here. Not ever. Jesus turned to me then, and there was fire in His eyes, not anger, but truth burning so bright it left no room for excuses. Do you see, He said softly, the sin they all share? I looked back at the endless line of people, pastors, missionaries, worship leaders, ordinary believers. They had prayed, preached, sung, and served, yet each was turned away. I shook my head, desperate for an answer. And then, He said it, unforgiveness. That one word hit harder than any bullet I'd ever faced. He said it was the sin that would send more Christians to hell than any other, not because it's worse, but because people treat it like it's nothing. He showed me their hearts one by one. A woman who hadn't spoken to her sister in 15 years over money. A man who could quote scripture by memory but carried a lifetime of hatred toward his father. A missionary who had forgiven everyone but the one who betrayed her trust. A pastor who preached grace but secretly dreamed of revenge on the man who hurt his daughter. Their faces looked holy, but their hearts were heavy, shackled by bitterness. Then Jesus looked at me again. They sang about my forgiveness, He said, but they never lived it. They prayed for mercy but refused to give it. They thought they could hold grudges and still walk in grace. But unforgiveness doesn't wound me, it poisons them. It turns their faith into theater, their worship into noise. Because if you refuse to forgive, you've never truly understood what it means to be forgiven. I stood there, feeling my chest tighten. I thought of faces I hadn't seen in years, people who hurt me, betrayed me, disappointed me. I told myself I'd moved on, but deep down I knew I hadn't. I carried those names like stones in my pocket. And standing there in that holy light, I realized those stones were heavier than any sin I'd ever confessed. He spoke again, and His words carved themselves into my soul. I forgave the men who drove nails through my hands. I forgave the world that murdered me. And I command my followers to forgive, not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. You cannot enter my kingdom carrying chains of resentment. In that moment, I understood what no sermon had ever taught me. Unforgiveness isn't anger, it's rebellion. It's looking at the cross and saying, your mercy is enough for me, but not for them. and that's a dangerous place to stand. That night, I realized hell isn't always a place of fire. Sometimes it's the prison you build in your own heart, the one you refuse to unlock with the key of forgiveness. Jesus didn't just tell me about unforgiveness, he showed me what it looked like. One by one, faces appeared before me like scenes from a film, each one telling a story I couldn't forget. The first was a woman, her voice once lifted crowds in worship, her hands raised high in praise every Sunday. She looked the part of devotion, but Jesus let me see deeper. Her heart was heavy with silence. She hadn't spoken to her own sister in 15 years over an inheritance dispute. Every time she sang about grace, a wall of bitterness stood between her and the very God she was singing to. Then came a man who knew Scripture like a scholar. He could quote entire books of the Bible verse by verse with precision that could humble a theologian. But behind that knowledge was a wound he'd never forgiven his father. Even after the old man had died, the son still carried his anger like a badge, proof of how deeply he'd been wronged. And though he preached about heaven, he lived chained to the grave of a man he refused to release. Next, I saw a missionary. She had given her life to serve others, to preach the name of Jesus in places most of us wouldn't dare to go. Her story looked heroic on the outside, but her heart told a different truth. Years ago, a close friend and fellow missionary betrayed her, twisting lies that cost her everything, her reputation, her calling, her peace. She forgave almost everyone, except that one. That single name was enough to close heaven's gates over her own life. Then I saw a pastor, polished, powerful, loved by his congregation. His sermons stirred the spirit, his ministry drew thousands. Yet deep inside, a storm raged. Years earlier, someone had hurt his daughter, and he'd never let it go. He smiled on stage, but fantasized about revenge in private. He preached about mercy, but his heart whispered vengeance. Jesus turned to me, his eyes sorrowful yet steady. "You see, Clint," he said, "these people thought they were serving me. They thought their works could cover the cracks in their hearts. But faith can't coexist with hatred. You can't worship me while you're holding a grudge against someone I died to forgive." Those stories cut deep because I saw myself in them, the quiet grudges I justified, the memories I refused to let heal. It hit me that unforgiveness doesn't always look like rage. It often hides behind religion, success, and pride. And in that moment, I realized the most dangerous wounds are the ones you learn to live with. Because what you refuse to forgive, you slowly become. And that's how bitterness steals your soul, one silent moment at a time. When Jesus began to speak again, his words carried that quiet kind of power that doesn't need to shout to shake the earth. "Clint," he said, "I told them plainly again and again, but they never took me at my word." His voice wasn't angry, it was sorrowful, steady, filled with the weight of eternity. Then he quoted what I'd heard 100 times but never really heard. "If you do not forgive others their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive yours." He paused, letting that truth hang in the air like thunder before a storm. They memorized John 3:16, they recited Romans 10-9, but they skipped over Matthew 6:14. They liked grace, but not the cost that comes with it. He showed me flashes of the scriptures I'd skimmed past in my youth. Mark 11:25, the warning about praying while holding a grudge. The parable of the unforgiving servant in Matthew 18, where a man forgiven of an impossible debt refused to forgive another who owed him just a few coins. I'd seen those words before, but now they were alive. The stories weren't parables anymore, they were people. People like me. I thought of how often I'd heard preachers say, "Forgiveness is a process," as if it were optional, like spiritual extra credit. But Jesus made it clear it's not optional. It's the evidence that you've truly received grace. Without it, your faith is just words on a page. Forgiveness isn't about being weak, it's about understanding the cross. The nails didn't just buy you pardon, they gave you the power to forgive the unforgivable. He looked at me then, and there was no judgment in his gaze, only truth. You can't claim to follow me, he said, if you won't live like me. I forgave those who murdered me, spat on me, mocked me, and I ask my followers to do the same, not because it's easy, but because it's the only way to be free. It hit me like a punch to the gut. Forgiveness wasn't just a moral duty, it was a mirror of the gospel. You can't receive it without giving it. You can't understand grace if you won't extend it. Standing there, I realized something I'd missed my whole life. Heaven doesn't measure the number of your prayers, your sermons, or your good deeds. It measures the condition of your heart. And a heart that refuses to forgive is a heart that's never truly been changed. That truth cut through everything I thought I knew about faith. Forgiveness isn't a verse, it's the heartbeat of salvation. And when you finally grasp that, you stop asking, do they deserve my forgiveness? And start asking, do I deserve his? Then he turned to me, and I'll never forget the look in his eyes, steady, knowing, and impossibly gentle. Clint, he said, who do you need to forgive? That question hit harder than any truth he'd spoken so far. Because I knew, before I could even think, their faces came rushing in my father, a hard man who gave discipline but not affection, a business partner who smiled while stabbing me in the back, a critic who made it his life's mission to tear me down, a friend who disappeared when I needed him most. I'd told myself I'd moved on. I'd buried those memories under years of work and pride. But buried anger doesn't die, it just hardens. I tried to protest, to reason with him. Lord, I said, some wounds don't heal. Some people don't deserve forgiveness. His eyes didn't waver. I didn't forgive you because you deserved it, he said. I forgave you because love demanded it. Forgiveness isn't a feeling, Clint, it's a decision, a surrender. You let go of your right to make them pay, and you trust me to do what's just. That stopped me cold. I'd always thought forgiveness meant pretending nothing happened, forgetting the pain, excusing the wrong. But he wasn't asking me to erase the past. He was asking me to stop letting it own me. You're not freeing them, he said. You're freeing yourself. In that moment, I saw how every grudge I held had become a chain around my soul. Every time I replayed an old hurt, I was tightening the lock. And I realized forgiveness wasn't weakness, it was strength. The kind that comes from looking pain in the eye and saying, you don't control me anymore. He told me something else that stuck with me. Forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. Some people are not safe to trust again. It doesn't mean pretending what they did was right. It means releasing them from the debt they owe you. That's all. But that's everything. When I woke up, I was on my knees, tears soaking the floor. It was 4 a.m, and I started going through every name, every wound, every scar, whispering forgiveness one by one. Some came easy, others tore something out of me, but I meant every word. I'll be honest, it's not something you do once and move on. Forgiveness is a choice you have to keep making every time the hurt resurfaces. But each time you do, the chain gets lighter. Jesus was right. Forgiveness isn't about them, it's about you. It's about peace. It's about freedom. And sometimes the only way to heal a wound that deep is to let go of the knife still in your own hand. When I woke up from that dream, I was already on my knees. My face was wet with tears, and my hands were trembling like they'd carried a lifetime of weight. The clock read 4 a.m, but time didn't seem to matter anymore. All I could feel was this deep urgency inside me, like I'd been given a glimpse of something eternal, and now I had to make it right. I started speaking out names one after another, people I hadn't thought about in years, faces that still stung when I remembered them. My father, my ex-partner, friends who betrayed me. I whispered their names one by one and said, I forgive you. Some of them I had to say twice, some I'm still saying. Forgiveness isn't a single moment, it's a battle that happens in the quiet. Each time you choose to let go, the chain gets weaker. Each time you forgive, your heart gets lighter. But I realized something that morning, something that scared me to the core. There will be millions of people standing before God one day, thinking they've made it, only to hear the words, I never knew you. Not because they didn't believe in Jesus, not because they didn't serve or give, but because they never forgave. They held on to their anger, their grudges, their sense of justice, and in doing so, they locked themselves out of the very kingdom they thought was theirs. See, unforgiveness doesn't just hurt your soul, it blinds you. It makes you think you're fine when you're slowly drifting away from grace. You can sing about mercy on Sunday and still be chained by bitterness on Monday. You can quote verses about love while secretly wishing harm on someone who hurt you. And that's the tragedy, because Jesus already paid for their sins and ours. But when we refuse to forgive, it's like we're standing at the gates of heaven holding the key in our hand, refusing to use it. That night, I learned something I'll never forget. Unforgiveness is hell's most subtle weapon. It doesn't roar or threaten, it whispers. It convinces you that holding on to pain makes you strong, that letting go means they win. But it's the opposite. When you forgive, you don't lose, you're set free. You don't excuse the wrong, you release yourself from it. I don't pretend to have all the answers. I'm just an old man who's seen too much and learned some lessons too late. But if there's one thing I know now, it's this. Heaven isn't for perfect people, it's for forgiven ones. And the only way to walk through that gate is with a heart that forgives. You know, I've lived long enough to see a lot of things come and go, fame, fortune, people, even faith. But one thing I've learned that never fades is this truth. You can't live free if you don't forgive. That dream changed me. It didn't just shake my soul, it broke me open. I realized forgiveness isn't about making peace with others, it's about making peace with yourself, with God, and with eternity. I think about the faces I've seen in life, families torn apart over money, brothers who won't speak for decades, marriages destroyed because no one could say, I forgive you. We think holding a grudge keeps us strong, but really, it keeps us chained. Every time you replay that hurt, you hand the key to your peace back to your pain, and sooner or later it starts to own you. So if you're listening to this, if you've been carrying something heavy for too long, I'm telling you straight, let it go. Forgive your father for what he couldn't give. Forgive your mother for what she didn't know how to say. Forgive your ex, your boss, your friend who betrayed you, the church that hurt you. Forgive them not because they deserve it, but because you can't afford not to. Jesus didn't die so we could live halfway healed. He died so we could live free. And freedom doesn't start when you die, it starts the moment you release the people who hurt you. The moment you say, I forgive, you're not setting them free, you're unlocking your own cell. Forgiveness doesn't mean you forget. It doesn't mean what they did was right. It doesn't mean you have to trust them again. It means you hand the gavel to God and walk out of the courtroom. Because justice belongs to Him, not to you, and He's a far better judge than we'll ever be. I know how hard it is. I've wrestled with it myself, nights staring at the ceiling, arguing with God, trying to justify why my anger was reasonable. But the truth is, unforgiveness never protects you. It just poisons you slowly. And the longer you hold it, the harder it becomes to hear God's voice. So this is my last word to you, not as an actor, not as a preacher, just as a man who's seen too much to lie to himself anymore. Forgive them all, forgive them before the sun sets again. Because at the end of it all, when you stand before God, the only heart that enters His kingdom is the one that has learned to let go. Forgive because that's what real freedom feels like.